Charlene VALDEZ, and I am going to lead Forum 1. These are the presentations for women in the history of science. So I'd like to lead this talk with a question, and please feel free to interject if you'd like to answer this question. So the question is, what was the name of Edwin, Buzz Aldrin, and Neil Armstrong's first mission to the moon? And I'll give you a hint through a picture. Anybody? Okay. All right, so if you don't know the answer, it's Apollo 11. But this mission would not have been possible if it wasn't for the person I'll be speaking about today, Miss Katherine Johnson. All right, so my presentation is titled #Nevertheless She Persisted. This is a real hashtag on Twitter, you should look it up. A Katherine Johnson story. All right, so I'm gonna give you some background on Katherine. So, Katherine Coleman Goebel Johnson was born on August 26 in 1918. She was born in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. She's actually age 99 currently, and she got her bachelor's degree in mathematics and French. And later in Katherine's life, she actually worked at NASA, and her appointment to NASA was in 1953, and she actually retired in 1986. You may recognize this name because she was featured in a recent Hollywood film, Hidden Figures. So, Katherine, in her early life, she had a very strong affinity for mathematics, and she was always identified as a math scholar through school. She was born to Joshua and Joylette Coleman, and she was the youngest of 4 children, as seen above. Her mother worked as a school teacher, and her father worked as a handyman. There's Katherine right there. Okay. All right. So, even though Katherine had an early introduction to mathematics, she really dove into her studies when she went to college. So prior to that, she graduated high school around the age of 10, very early, and she attended the university at University State College in West Virginia. This is a historically black college that actually educated the children of former slaves. And while there, she immediately found a mentor to educate her and guide her through her studies in mathematics. The mentor's name was W.W. Shaflin-Clater, and he was the third African-American to receive his PhD in mathematics. Okay, so I believe education leads to enlightenment, and here's just a timeline of Katherine's matriculation through her education. So Katherine graduated college summa cum laude at age 18 in 1937. She actually worked at an all-black public school afterwards, and following this, she was accepted into a graduate program at West Virginia State University, which was previously segregated, and she was one of 3 students to be selected for this program. And actually, she did not complete the program due to an early pregnancy, but also she felt very uncomfortable in the environment. And Katherine just so happened to be the first African-American woman to be accepted in this university in general. So, all right, so I believe assiduous efforts lead to achievement. So one of her efforts was that she applied for a position at NACA, which is now known as NASA. And while there, she worked at the West Area Computing Unit. This was a segregated unit in comparison to the other computing units at NASA. And this was an all-black, all-female computing unit, and this was run by Dorothy Vaughan, who is featured here in my pictures. But because of her strides and all of the amazing work that she had done in the computing unit, she was later selected to work in the Space Task Group. So I'd like to show you the difference in like the amount of women in these pictures, and also like the difference in like racial background in these pictures. So in the first picture, you see that in the West Area Computing Unit, it's majority African-American women. In the second, this is when Katherine was brought into the Johnson Space Group. Clearly, she is the only woman of color that is present in that space. There are other women that are there, but as seen in the film, she was one of the few African-American women that were present in a sea of white males. Okay, so these are some of Katherine's most iconic works at NASA. So Katherine actually worked on Apollo 11, which I mentioned recently, Apollo 13, and Friendship 7. So Katherine was able to do the majority of the calculations for all 3 of these missions. So especially Friendship 7 was one of the most important missions at NASA because astronaut John Glenn was able to orbit around the Earth for the first time. And he actually was very persistent about having Katherine do all of the calculations for this particular mission. Forgive me. All right, so in addition to those achievements, Katherine has many other accolades under her belt, but one that I'd really like to highlight is that in 2015, she won the Presidential Medal of Freedom Award. This was awarded to her by President Barack Obama, and some of the former recipients of this award are Joe Biden, Bill Gates, Dolores Huerta, and Ellen DeGeneres, and this is one of the highest honors that you can receive in the United States. And in 2016, NASA actually opened the Langley Katherine G. Johnson Computational Research Center in her honor. All right, so her influence on me. So I chose Katherine Johnson because she's just a very positive role model for women in science. She was very persistent and very hardworking in her field, and she didn't let her color get in the way of, you know, anyone's opinions. I also think she's a positive representative for women of color and women and young girls alike, and she's actually inspired me to do a lot of advocacy for students of color at NYU, specifically to get them to participate in academic research. And these are some facts that I'd actually like to share, and we've been hearing this throughout ELIS through our time here. So women hold less than a quarter of all jobs in the natural and applied sciences, and that's unfortunate. And women of color actually make up less than 2 of 10 employees within the sciences. So you can see how incredible all these accomplishments that Katherine has are. So I think the representation matters. Another real hashtag on Twitter. All right, and how can you lead like Katherine? So I think that this is extremely important. So one way that you can lead like Katherine is promoting STEM education in K through 12. You can also advocate for equal employment in STEM for women and women of color alike, and also to advocate so that there's no discrimination when any of the policies are set in and everyone is treated equally. And you can also attend the ELIS seminars, just as we are today. So, all right. And that's all I have for you today, and thank you so much.
Hello, everybody. My name is Monideepa Chatterjee. I am a PhD student at Cornell University studying biomedical engineering, and today I'd like to share, oh, that's bright. I'd like to share a little bit about Dr. Jane Cook Wright, who was a medical oncologist and researcher and has left a lasting legacy in the biomedical research field. But before I get started, I want everyone in the room to take a minute and think about some traits that you look for in a successful scientist. Everybody thinking? Everybody have something in mind? Show of hands, does anybody's list include any of the things on here? Yeah. So on here, these are qualities that I look for when I'm thinking about successful scientists and kind of envisioning what kind of a scientist I want to be. So I have hardworking, curious, and intellectual, ability to overcome challenges, commitment to advocacy, and the ability to serve as a role model to the younger generation of scientists. And these are all traits that I believe that Dr. Wright encompasses and that I want to convince you of today. So Dr. Jane Cook Wright was an African-American woman born into a family of doctors. She was a doctor herself, but her legacy started long before that. Her grandfather was actually a slave freed after the Civil War, whereupon afterwards he attended medical school and was a practicing doctor. Her father was also a practicing physician, and this kind of motivated her to pursue medicine as a career. She completed her undergraduate studies at Smith College, where in addition to being an excellent student, she was also involved in extracurriculars and showed commitment to understanding other cultures across the world. So she excelled in her German classes. She was also a varsity swim captain. In 1942, she attended New York Medical College on an academic scholarship, and she completed medical school in only 3 years as opposed to the usual 4 due to accelerated programs during World War II. Her main claim to fame is pioneering chemotherapy. I'm sure many people in this room have either personally been affected or have had family members affected by cancer. So at the time, before she got started, cancer was mostly seen as a surgical specialty. So if your cancer couldn't be treated with surgery, you were out of luck. Patient prognosis was very poor. There were many comorbidities associated with cancer. But her work really left a lasting impact on chemotherapy research, and many of the pharmaceuticals developed by her are still used today. and at the time had added an additional 10 years to the lifespan of cancer patients. Her work really focused on putting the patient first. So she was really interested in tracking systematically clinical trials. So what specific order do you administer your chemotherapy drugs? What are the specific patient outcomes you look for? Things like that. And she also was one of the first to use human cancer cells in the lab to look at the effects of these treatments. And by using human cancer cells, that allows you to look at specific qualities to a patient. So how old is the patient? Are they a smoker? Are they male or female? And these all have impacts on the patient prognosis. And in fact, this led to the rise of personalized medicine that's still used today in biomedical research. Her achievements are further notable due to her ability to overcome racial and gender biases at the time. Her career was on the rise during the 1950s and 60s, and this time in America was very turbulent for the civil rights movement. So here I have a photo that might be very familiar to some people in the audience. There were different water fountains even for white people and African American people. They couldn't sit in the same section on the bus. And so the ability for her to overcome these challenges and biases in her personal life, in the workspace, is very remarkable. Additionally, research was and still continues to be a very male-dominated field. However, despite these challenges, she rose to become the highest-ranked African-American woman at a nationally recognized medical institution. She was the Associate Dean at New York Medical College, and she was the first female president of the New York Cancer Society in 1971. And this would not have been possible without her strong support from her family and her strong support from her professional mentors. Because she received so much encouragement and advisement from her support network, she also demonstrated a real commitment to giving back to the greater community. So in these three areas. So for her, global health, especially early in her career, was very important. She led several medical missions across the world. She also placed a heavy emphasis on peer collaboration, which still continues to exist today. At the time, there was no network for medical researchers, especially in cancer research, to share their findings. So instead of trying to move her way through the existing network, she just made her own one. She founded the American Society for Clinical Oncology, which still exists today, has tens of thousands of members. She also placed an emphasis on the use of medical research for medical students in the university, emphasizing the importance of cross-disciplinary collaborations. She also served on several government policy committees listed here. And here, one of her main goals was to found regional cancer networks so that this provides access to groundbreaking cancer research to many areas across the United States that might not have access to improved health care. So as I mentioned, her work has left a lasting legacy not only in the cancer research field, but in many areas of biomedical research. I personally study orthopedics and tendons. So I study shoulder injuries of the rotator cuff, and that affects about 40% of the population. And her work was really one of the first works to pioneer patient-oriented research, as I mentioned earlier. And so if you think about it, at your table, 2 or 3 of you will have some sort of tendon injury at some point in your life. And so my work is looking at what are the different factors in each of us in our, when we get these diseases, and how can we treat them specifically depending on your specific set of conditions, whether it's due to old age, whether it's a sports injury, whether you have some other underlying conditions such as diabetes, etc. And hopefully with those we can develop new treatments. Additionally, she placed a heavy emphasis on collaboration across disciplines. So as a biomedical engineer, I collaborate with a lot of surgeons, with a lot of physical therapists, and that has made sure that my research stays very patient-oriented and patient-focused. She also was a strong advocate for legislative policy, which I believe is incredibly important, especially as time progresses, perhaps. I think a lot of people become very polarized on different sides of believing science, not believing science, and her commitment to ensuring high quality of healthcare and science education for all remains critical even today. And finally, I think it's incredibly important to have a strong mentorship and support network. I think we've all developed that here over the course of the last 10 days here at ELIS, as well as being sure that we have a strong commitment to cross-cultural and cross-disciplinary collaborations. And so with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention and your time.
Hello everyone, my name is Olivia George, and I study material science at the University of Delaware. My story is about Stephanie Kwolek, who invented Kevlar. And for me, this story was initially interesting from a material science perspective, because I'm really curious about what properties at a molecular level lead to really interesting properties at a macroscopic level. And many of us know that Kevlar is used in bulletproof vests. So I thought it was really neat that something that is so lightweight can be able to prevent a bullet from penetrating through our chest, for example. From your perspective, I hope that this story highlights an example of the serendipitous process of research. As I got into reading more about her, I thought that her research kind of path was really spontaneous and a good example of how big scientific discoveries happen in the real world. So Stephanie Kwolek was born in New Kensington, which is just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She was born to Polish immigrant parents, and New Kensington is not a big city. There's a lot of nature there, so her father would take her on walks, and they would document the things that they found, and she had a nature journal that she liked to keep. She was really curious about the natural world, and her mother would make a lot of her clothes, and in that way inspired her curiosity about fashion, and so it wasn't really clear early on which path she would take. But she was really talented academically, and many of you might recognize this is Carnegie Mellon's campus. This is where she ultimately went for her undergraduate. Here's the Cathedral of Learning, if anyone wants to orient themselves, and here are the bridges leading into Pittsburgh, and CMU is right here. And at that time, it was known as the Carnegie Institute of Technology, and she thought that by going this way and studying chemistry, this might lead to a good teaching position at the high school level after graduation. And she got there, and this is probably what her classroom looked like. This isn't her classroom, but this is what I found when I typed in classroom in the 1940s. And so if you can count more than like 6 women, that's impressive. I counted 6, maybe 7. But overwhelmingly, her classroom had mainly males. But she continued on, and this didn't stop her. She found a professor that encouraged her interest in sciences, and she ultimately she graduated in 1946, and she really wanted to continue on her education as a medical doctor, but she lacked the funds to do so. So she realized, I'm going to have to get a job. And applied around and got a job at DuPont in northern New York. And eventually she abandoned her desire to go to her dreams to go to medical school because she loved what she was doing, just the daily process. And she was transferred to DuPont headquarters, which is in Wilmington, Delaware. And there she was studying low temperature processes for making fibers that could withstand extreme temperature conditions. This is DuPont's headquarters. This story also hits home for me because this is kind of home. This is actually 20 minutes up the road from where I'm currently based. And this is what it looks like today. But it's a very large campus, and this is where DuPont is headquartered now, Dow DuPont. So there isn't much science in my presentation, but I just wanted to give an idea of what her scientific process might have looked like on a daily basis. So making fibers, she would first she would first make her polymeric solution and then purify it. And this is actually probably the hardest part of the whole process is making the material and then being able to isolate it from all the other things that you don't want in your reaction vessel. Oops. And then she'd pour it into this extruder, and then the fibers would come out of this. This is called a spinneret, and it looks like a shower head. And still the fibers are in. Oops. Still the fibers are in solution, and here they go through this coagulation bath and become a solid, and then they spin it on this little mandrel thing with a motor. And the water is supposed to, I guess, get off any solvent that might be left on there from the coagulation bath. And this is what Kevlar looks like. So her scientific process, it was serendipitous because she first couldn't get her solution to dissolve in solvents. She tried a bunch of solvents, and things weren't working for a while. And eventually she found one that worked, but her solution was a bit cloudy and it was low viscosity, and this was uncommon for doing this wet spinning process. And so her colleagues said, don't put that in the spinneret, it's going to clog, you're going to break the instrument. And there was a long period of time where she kind of had to prove herself with her scientific data to say, no, it's not going to break the instrument. I've purified it. I've tried filtering it. It's not going to precipitate out. Everything I trust in these results. And finally, he let her put it. I guess he was helping her. He was like a lab tech, and they put it in the instrument, and the result was pretty astonishing. She ended up with these really, really high strength fibers with strength higher than like a bar of steel, tensile strength higher than steel. So why is this? Kevlar is really strong mainly from the hydrogen bonding here that happens in between polymer chains, and the properties are also improved by these aromatic rings that can pi stack on top of each other. And when the polymers are being stretched like this, you can imagine it at a macroscopic scale, you're orienting all of these long polymer chains so that they're kind of stacked on top of each other really nicely, and you get a larger scale version of this happening. As you can see, steel tensile strength is about 250, whereas the Kevlar is about 370, and there's lots of different types of Kevlar, so they get even stronger than that. I'm a very visual person, so it was really interesting to me to see this layout of DuPont's campus and where Kevlar was discovered in Building 302, and also these very similar materials. They're also polyaramids, Nomex and Lycra that were also developed there, probably because of Stephanie Kwolek's work. So since her discovery, we've had lots of different innovations that have been reliant on her technology. For instance, if anyone's used spandex, that's Lycra, as well as the bulletproof vest, that's Kevlar. This is Nomex, it's the flame-resistant material. And this is a picture of her at the University of Delaware, where I go to school, and she's received 3 honorary degrees, one from University of Delaware, as well as had 17 patents and won many awards. And I think her story is a nice example of how, in the face of adversity, she for instance, when she was at school, she had many, not so many female role models. And then at work, when her coworker was saying this isn't going to work, she just believed in herself, and I think that as a scientist, that's really motivating for the work that we do on a daily basis. Discovery could happen at any point in time. They could change the world. So thank you.
Hi everyone. So my name is Josyl ROCAMORA. You can just call me Josyl. I study at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University under the Department of Electronic and Information Engineering. So just a brief introduction of my research. I mostly study wireless communications, how devices communicate or how the networks operate. And other things are like Internet of Things, machine learning, vehicular communications. So today I will be talking about the story of Professor Daniela Ruse. She is a female roboticist that has influenced a lot of her research into everyday lives, like how different devices can actually communicate and locate inside a particular room. Her research and her story has actually influenced me a lot, such that I was able to start working on indoor localization or indoor positioning system. So the story will be as follows. First of all, I will introduce her leadership, or how she was able to lead a group of roboticists in MIT, and then what are her works in robotics, which has actually made me realize how interesting her field is. Then lastly, how she is a role model to children and even her daughters. Then finally, what I have learned among reading about her research works and her philanthropy. Okay, so first of all, I kind of learned about Professor Ruse when I took this online course in MIT. It's about Internet of Things, a roadmap to a connected world. That was last summer. These are some of the topics that the online course offered: some IoT systems, connectivity technologies, the localization, network security, and some applications into, for example, vehicular communications and other things like robotics. She's actually the one who gave the lecture on localization, which is kind of important to me because I learned how important localization is, and it's usually GPS outdoors, but for indoors, there are no particular standards in place yet. So what is localization? It's just the problem of determining the device's position or heading through sensing with respect to a reference frame. For example, we want to find out where the device is, in particular to a certain axis or some certain reference frame. This problem is quite important in order for us to actually determine which device should communicate with each other. So before proceeding to her research work, let me just introduce who Professor Daniela Ruse is. So this is actually her picture, and she graduated PhD in computer science, major in robotics in 1993 from Cornell. And she's affiliated with lots of different organizations relevant to our field, such as Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineering and ACM, or Association for Computing Machinery. Okay, aside from that, being able to actively participate in organizations, she received several awards. Two of them are the class of 2002 MacArthur Fellow and an award for being a roboticist in education from the Joseph Engelbert Award. And currently, she's a professor at the MIT EECS, or Electrical and Electronics and Computing Science. And she's actually the first female director of MIT CSAIL, or CSAIL, or which is Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. So as you can see, she has achieved a lot of things. She led this big group. She received a lot of awards and is actually active in different organizations. Okay, so aside from her leadership, she also leads a big group of a research lab, and her main goal is to make robots become ubiquitous. That is, they are part of our everyday life. For instance, they work on these different areas, such as AI and machine learning. For example, they can just take a picture of some food ingredients, and then the app will suggest what recipe they can use. Or something like monitor the sleep disorder using radio waves or wireless communications, and just make something that, based on algorithm and theory, apply it into practical applications. although the CSAIL Research Lab is quite big, it is composed of 60 diverse groups. Her own particular group named Distributed Robotics Lab have other more specific research works that they're targeting. So I will not mention everything, just the three research works that they're doing that has been quite interesting for me. So these are the self-driving cars, soft robots, robot compilers. So on the self-driving cars, this is research in collaboration between the lab and Toyota Research Institute. Their primary goal is to make people worry less about traffic and navigation and to improve the driving mechanism we have today and hopefully reduce traffic accidents. So this includes several parts in order to actually make these goals achievable. The first one is to perception, second one is planning, and the third one is control. So actually my research work on indoor positioning, or rather positioning, can actually contribute into the perception part. It's the part for sensing the environment, determining whether what particular location the device is or the vehicle is. So it's actually interesting that maybe eventually my research can actually go into vehicular communications. Okay, so although it is so amazing, there are some problems with this kind of research. For example, we want to reduce traffic accidents, but how will the cars decide? If it's going this way and it might kill a certain person, it might go another way, but might be able to kill like 5 persons. So what will the car decide? Will it move to the left or just move straight forward? So yeah, it's actually not only technical, but it's actually morally relevant. Other research works include soft robots. As the name implies, they have like a soft feature that emulate a real-life hand and or arm, and some soft robotic fish, wherein they actually look like or feel like underwater sea creatures. The first two would be quite interesting, like how would my research contribute to make this more useful? And for the last one, how will the fish move underwater given that they know where they are located? And another interesting part of their research is robot compilers. They try to make the programming of the robots more user-friendly, like using English instead of using those very complicated syntax where they have to learn quite a more complex language programming. Okay, so aside from being a great leader and a great researcher or roboticist, she has actually done a lot of projects that contribute to the early education. For instance, she's active in promoting computing science, or CS, in early education. There are some statistics showing that young students actually want to get involved with this. And as you can see from the statistics, almost half are girls, which is a big deal to introduce the STEM into women. Then they have these other projects here. They also go into other places wherein there's not much computers. So they go to this project, to this place to introduce computing to these people. And one of the things that actually hit hard to me is, in her interview, is that I discovered that she is a mother of 2 daughters. And she tried to give them more opportunity to be exposed to STEM. So this is quite a big, it relates to me, as I have just gotten married a few weeks ago, and thinking, how can I be like a woman with a career, but still be able to influence my future children or something like that. Okay, so in conclusion, I realized that women in STEM can actually do a lot of things. Be a leader, be a good researcher, a role model, and actually influence a lot in humankind. So I finished my presentation by giving you this quotation from her interview. Professor Daniela Ruse imagined a future where robots are so integrated in the fabric of human life that they become as common as smartphones today. So the field of robotics has the potential to greatly improve the quality of our lives at work, at home, and at play. Okay. Thank you for listening.
Hello, my name is YOUK, and I want to introduce Mileva Maric. The subject of this presentation is Women in Science History. So you maybe expect someone who performed positive results. Yes? However, this time is not. Actually, she has no specific result in science field. Instead, I want to look around her life and learn some lessons. What kind of attitude we need to have. My content is like that. First, I will introduce the Mileva Maric. After looking around her sad biography, we can learn the lessons on a personal point of view and on a social point of view. Do you know who is he? Yeah, Einstein. As you know very well, he had a huge impact on not only modern physics, but also human history. Then, do you know who is she? She was the first wife of Einstein, Mileva Maric. She was also good at mathematics and physics. However, she was not well known compared to Einstein's very popular reputation. Now I believe you are familiar with her. Mileva Maric was born in a small Serbian village. Serbia had a sad story about aggression and many civil wars at that time. She had inborn disabled. She was a lame. Since she was a little girl, she had concentrated on her insight for compensation of this disability. So she always tried to learn as much as possible. Her family always supported her education. His father even sent a proposal to the Minister of Education for her to have education French language. She had talented in language, math, science, music, and art. She always supported herself to study more. At that time, only Swiss Federal Institute of Technology Zurich accepted a women student. She decided to go to Switzerland for her study. She left her country alone. In 19th century, women were forced to be a good wife and mother. There was education only for men. Women were ridiculed if they wanted to study. Based on this historical background, Mileva was very active and ambitious woman. In Zurich University, she was a member of physics study. She was the only woman and eldest in 6 classmates. So she was a leader and took care of the classmates. Einstein was the youngest student in there. Maric had the confidence about her knowledge, and Einstein loved her confidence. Although most people regarded Einstein was stupid, she always encouraged Einstein. Einstein got the full confidence in her encouragement. After their marriage, they had a happy life. They have a social gathering to share music performance, scientific issues, and political issues. In this period, Einstein published the historical theory. Maybe you know relativity theory. Besides this, he made best achievement in human history, such as quantum theory, general relativity theory. And this thing affected even our current research field. However, the World War I happened, and they were separated. In this period, Einstein noticed the divorce with her, and he remarried with her cousin. Besides, one of her children had a mental illness, so she had to take care of him. She had hardship in nurturing children, but she was rejected the economic aid from Einstein twice. Furthermore, her father died because of the stroke. Her sister had mental illness during World War, and her brother was missed in that World War. Her son was getting more serious mental illness, so he tried to strangle her. Suffering from many hardships in life, she finally died alone in a white hospital. There are many arguments about her contribution for relativity theory. Some people claim that there are some stories about that. Peter Michel Moore, who is a collector of Einstein's material, said Mileva helped with the mathematical part of Einstein's story. And in the letter from Einstein, he said, "I would be very proud if we worked together to study the relativity movement." And when Einstein published the paper of relativity theory, Hermann Minkowski, who was a German mathematician, said, "This was a surprise to me. Einstein was a ridiculous stranger, and he was not even interested in mathematics." And Mileva's best friend, Milana Bota, said in her interview, "It would have been best if she had been tasked with reporting on Einstein's theory. She was involved in making this theory." She probably did not even want to talk about it because she didn't want to hurt her ex-husband's great reputation. Besides, there was no special specific scientific performance of Einstein after their divorce. Still, there are no specific references about her contribution to the theory. However, based on the ambitious story about her, it is possible for her to be engaged in the theory. She was smart, intelligent, and ambitious, but there was no development as a scientist. Then what made her depressed? First, I think she hit herself too much. Marie Curie, maybe you know this scientist well, had a good relationship with Mileva Maric. Marie Curie always tried to help her hardship, but she refused the kindness and didn't express her inside heart. So the Marie Curie's help was useless. Einstein also complained about her attitude. She had no conversation about her inner heart, even with Einstein. She never exposed herself at this, and at this point, I was disappointed from her. Everyone tried to help her, but she had no answer. What if she had expressed her opinion? So I think to express and reveal our opinions is an important factor to avoid unreasonable situations. But I think that she would be frustrated although she revealed herself. As I mentioned before, the bad social background about women scientists would force her to be depressed. And similar to that, there are still many frames about women, such as be nice, be good girl, you always have to be, make your appearance, etc. And female scientists are always focused because they are female, rather than individual scientists. This social atmosphere would be the obstacle for research development. Also, legal regulations are needed. In Mileva's story, only she felt the responsibility about the children. No legal regulation protected her hardship, although Einstein rejected the economic aids. So I think the social effort to remove these frames for female scientists is important. And the legal regulations are needed to protect the unreasonable situations. So the conclusion can be summarized in 3 sentences. Mileva Maric, who was an ambitious girl, had been depressed not only in scientific field, but also in personal life. And I think we can learn some lessons from her. On personal level, we need to express ourselves actively. And on social level, we need to remove our frames for women and support the legal protections. Thank you.